Hey guys. Tonight we're headed somewhere quiet, dusty, and stretched across 1,000 miles of silence. We're going back to 1876, to the endless expanse of the American frontier, where communication moved at the speed of lightning through copper wire strung between wooden poles that seemed to disappear into the horizon. Tonight, you're not just observing history. You're living it, breathing it, feeling the weight of it settle into your bones as you take on one of the loneliest jobs in the Wild West: repairing telegraph lines. If you're new here, welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where we dive deep into the forgotten corners of the past, the quiet moments that shaped our world. If you actually enjoy this kind of thing, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. And hey, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love hearing from all of you night owls and insomniacs scattered across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's drift back in time to a place where the only sounds are wind through grass, the creak of leather, and the distant whisper of electricity traveling through wire toward destinations you may never see. You wake to the sound of wind pressing against canvas, a steady, rhythmic whisper that has become the soundtrack of your existence out here in the vast emptiness between Dodge City and Denver. The tent walls billow and settle, like the breathing of some great sleeping animal. Your eyes open slowly, adjusting to the pre-dawn gray filtering through the worn fabric above your head. The air is cool against your face, carrying the scent of sage and dust and something else, something indefinable that belongs only to this endless stretch of prairie. Your body aches in familiar places. Your shoulders, tight from yesterday's climb up pole after pole. Your hands, rough and cracked from rope and wire and weather. Your back, stiff from sleeping on the hard ground with only a thin bedroll between you and the earth. You flex your fingers slowly, feeling the stiffness in your joints, the protest of muscles that have been asked to do too much for too long. But this is your life now. Has been for 3 years, ever since you answered that advertisement in the Kansas City paper. Telegraph line repairman wanted, must be willing to work alone for weeks at a time, must be comfortable with heights and weather. Good pay for the right man. You had been the right man, or at least desperate enough to become him. You sit up slowly, feeling the weight of another day settling around your shoulders like a familiar coat. Through the tent flap, you can see the first pale hint of dawn touching the eastern horizon, a thin line of lighter gray against the dark sky. In an hour, maybe 2, the sun will begin its slow climb, and with it will come the heat that will make every task twice as difficult. You push back the thin blanket and swing your legs over the edge of your narrow cot. Your boots are where you left them, standing sentinel beside the tent pole, leather cracked but still serviceable. You pull them on slowly, methodically, working the laces with fingers that know this routine by heart. Left foot, right foot, pull the leather tight, tie the knots that will hold for another 12-hour day. Outside, you can hear your mule, Ezra, moving around in the small rope corral you set up yesterday evening. The steady sound of his hooves on hard earth, the occasional snort and stamp. He's probably wondering about breakfast, about when you'll fill his feed bag with the oats that are becoming more precious with each passing day out here, miles from the nearest supply depot. You stand and stretch, feeling your spine pop and crack like dry kindling. The tent is small, barely tall enough for you to stand upright, but it's home now. Has been home for longer than any house you've ever lived in. Your belongings are few and carefully chosen. The wooden toolbox that holds your life's work, wire strippers, climbing spikes, glass insulators wrapped in cloth, coils of copper wire, the small telegraph key that lets you test each repair. Your bedroll and blanket, a change of clothes, the leather-bound notebook where you record each day's work, each mile walked, each pole climbed, each connection restored. And the rifle, always the rifle, though you've never had cause to use it for anything more threatening than a rattlesnake coiled too close to a pole you needed to climb. You push through the tent flap and step into the morning air. The wind catches you immediately, cool and steady from the west, carrying the scent of distant rain that may or may not reach you before the day is done. Above, the stars are fading into the growing light, and you take a moment to orient yourself, to find the North Star that has guided you across this trackless expanse more nights than you care to count. To your left, running north and south as far as the eye can see, the telegraph line cuts across the landscape like a scar. Wooden poles, 40 feet tall and spaced a city block apart, each one carrying the thin copper wire that connects distant cities, that carries news and commerce and sometimes love letters across the void. Your responsibility, your burden, your reason for being in this place where civilization thins to almost nothing. You walk to where Ezra stands in his makeshift corral, and he greets you with a soft nicker, pushing his gray nose against your chest. You scratch behind his ears, feeling the coarse hair beneath your fingers, the warmth of his solid presence in this place of endless space and silence. "Good morning, old friend," you say, and your voice sounds strange after hours of not speaking, rough and unused. He bobs his head as if he understands, and maybe he does. Out here, you talk to him more than you've talked to any person in months. You fill his feed bag from the canvas sack tied to your supply pack, measuring out oats with the careful precision of someone who knows exactly how far the next resupply point lies. 43 miles to Bent's Fort, where you can restock supplies and maybe share a hot meal and a few words with another human being. But that's 3 days away, maybe 4 if you encounter serious line damage. While Ezra eats, you build your morning fire in the ring of stones you laid yesterday evening. The routine is automatic now, muscle memory built from hundreds of morning camps. Gather dried grass and small twigs for tinder. Strike flint against steel until the spark catches. Blow gently until flame blooms. Add larger twigs, then chunks of buffalo dung collected yesterday evening and dried in the prairie sun. The fire crackles to life, orange flames dancing in the growing daylight, and you set your dented tin pot over the coals to boil water for coffee. Real coffee, thank God, not the chicory substitute you've been reduced to before when supplies ran low. The beans are precious out here, worth almost their weight in silver, but the morning ritual of grinding them by hand and breathing in that rich, dark aroma is one of the few luxuries you allow yourself. As the water heats, you walk to the nearest telegraph pole, perhaps 50 yards from your camp. The wooden post rises straight and tall against the pale sky, weathered gray by sun and wind and the countless storms that sweep across this open country. You place your hand against the wood, feeling the grain beneath your palm, checking for signs of rot or insect damage. The pole seems solid, but you know that out here, appearance can be deceiving. You tilt your head back and follow the wire with your eyes as it stretches from pole to pole, a thin line against the enormous sky. Somewhere to the north, that wire carries messages between cities you'll probably never see again. Somewhere to the south, it connects to other lines, other networks, the vast web of communication that is slowly binding the continent together, word by word, message by message. But today, like every day, your job is simpler and more immediate. Find the breaks, fix the connections, keep the words flowing. You walk back to the fire, where the water is beginning to bubble in the tin pot. You measure coffee grounds into the pot with the careful precision of a pharmacist, stirring with a stick until the liquid turns the color of rich earth. The smell rises with the steam, and for a moment you close your eyes and breathe it in, letting the aroma carry you back to civilization, to mornings when coffee came with eggs and bacon and bread that hadn't been baked over an open fire. But those mornings belong to someone else now, someone you used to be before you chose this life of endless sky and constant motion. You pour the coffee into your tin cup, wrapping your hands around the warm metal. The first sip burns your tongue slightly, but you welcome the heat, the bitter taste that helps wash away the dust of sleep. You drink slowly, savoring each swallow, watching as the eastern horizon begins to blush with the promise of sunrise. From your supply pack, you take a piece of hardtack and a strip of dried beef. Breakfast of necessity, not pleasure. The hardtack is so tough you have to dip it in your coffee to make it edible, and the dried beef is salty enough to make you thirsty even as you eat. But it's fuel for the day ahead, protein and carbohydrates that will carry you through miles of walking and hours of climbing. As you eat, you consult the small notebook where you record your progress. Yesterday you covered 8 miles of line between poles 247 and 289, replacing 2 broken insulators and splicing a wire that had been severed by wind-blown debris. Today's goal is to reach pole 320, another 12 miles north, checking every connection, every insulator, every foot of wire along the way. 12 miles doesn't sound like much until you factor in the climbing, the careful inspection of each pole, the time spent testing connections with your portable telegraph key. On a good day, with no major repairs needed, you might cover 15 miles. On a bad day, when you encounter storm damage or equipment failure, you might make half that distance. But time has a different meaning out here. Days are measured not by clock hours but by distance covered, by problems solved, by the slow progress of maintaining this thin line of connection across an impossibly vast landscape. You finish your coffee and begin the morning ritual of breaking camp. The tent comes down in practiced movements, canvas folded and rolled tight, tent poles bundled and secured. Your bedroll straps to the supply pack along with the cooking pot and coffee grounds and the precious water containers that mean the difference between life and death in this dry country. Everything has its place, and everything must be secured against the constant wind that can turn any loose item into something lost forever in the endless grass. You learned that lesson early, when you lost a bag of coffee beans to a sudden gust and spent the next week drinking bitter water flavored with whatever wild plants you could find. Ezra stands patiently as you load the pack saddle, distributing weight carefully between the wooden toolbox and the supply packs. He's a good mule, bred for this kind of work, strong enough to carry the load and sure-footed enough to navigate the rough ground. You've had him for 2 years now, and he's proven more reliable than most people you've known. You clip your climbing spikes to the pack saddle, hearing the familiar jingle of metal against metal. The spikes are your lifeline when you have to climb the tall poles, sharp steel points that bite into wood and hold your weight 40 feet above the ground. Without them, this job would be impossible. With them, it's merely dangerous. The sunrise begins in earnest as you lead Ezra away from the campsite, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold that make the endless grassland glow like something from a dream. The beauty still catches you sometimes, even after 3 years of morning sunrises and evening sunsets. The way the light moves across the landscape, the way the sky seems to go on forever, the sense of being part of something larger than yourself. But beauty doesn't pay wages, and you have work to do. You begin walking north along the telegraph line, leading Ezra by his rope halter. The grass crunches under your boots, still heavy with dew that soaks through the cracked leather. Each step is measured, deliberate, your eyes constantly scanning the line overhead for signs of trouble. A sagging wire, a cracked insulator, a pole that leans at the wrong angle. The first pole you come to, number 290 according to your notebook, appears solid from the ground. But you've learned not to trust appearances. You strap on your climbing spikes, metal points biting into the leather of your boots, and begin the slow ascent. Hand over hand, spike biting into wood with each step, 40 feet up until you can examine the insulator and connection closely. The glass insulator is intact, a clear green dome that catches the morning light like a jewel. The wire connection is solid, properly wrapped and secure. You take out your small telegraph key and tap a quick test message into the line. Dit da dit. Dit da dit. The electrical pulse travels instantly in both directions, and somewhere, perhaps hundreds of miles away, another operator might hear your test signal and know that this section of line is working properly. But out here, you work mostly in silence. No one answers your test signals. No one knows where you are or what you're doing except for the weekly reports you file when you reach a depot or relay station. You are alone with the wire and the wind and the vast indifference of the prairie. The climb down is always easier than the climb up, spikes finding familiar holes in the wood, your body weight helping rather than hindering your progress. At the bottom, you unstrap the spikes and secure them to the pack saddle, then continue north to the next pole. Pole 291 shows more wear. The wood near the base is soft with rot, and you make a note in your book to flag it for replacement when the next crew comes through. The line itself is secure, but the pole won't last another year of prairie weather. Nothing lasts long out here. The sun bleaches and cracks everything exposed to it. The wind scours and erodes. The storms that sweep across this open country carry enough force to snap trees and level buildings. Yet somehow the telegraph line endures, maintained by men like you who spend their lives walking between the poles, making repairs, replacing what the weather destroys. It's a losing battle in one sense, a constant struggle against entropy and decay. But it's also essential work, the maintenance of the thin threads that hold civilization together across these vast distances. You continue north as the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher in the cloudless sky. Pole 292 needs a new insulator, the old one cracked by thermal expansion and contraction. You replace it carefully, unwrapping the old wire, securing the new glass dome, wrapping the connection with practiced precision. The work requires complete attention. One mistake, one poorly wrapped connection, and the line goes dead until someone else can find and fix your error. At pole 295, you discover your first serious problem of the day. The wire has snapped completely, severed by something that left the ends dangling 8 feet apart. Storm damage, most likely, though it could have been caused by a falling tree or even a buffalo using the pole as a scratching post. The big animals are usually smart enough to avoid the wires, but not always. You set up for a major repair, unloading your toolbox and spreading your equipment on a canvas ground cloth. Splicing telegraph wire is delicate work that requires steady hands and complete concentration. The copper must be clean and bright where it joins. The connection must be mechanically sound before you apply the solder. Any corrosion or poor contact will cause signal loss or complete failure. You strip the insulation from both wire ends, using your knife to peel back the rubber coating and expose the bright copper beneath. The metal gleams in the sunlight, clean and ready for connection. You twist the strands together, forming a splice that will be stronger than the original wire if done correctly. The soldering pot goes over a small fire built from dried grass and buffalo chips. While the solder melts, you clean the splice with sand and a piece of cloth, removing any trace of dirt or oxidation that might compromise the electrical connection. The work is meticulous, requiring patience and skill developed over years of practice. When the solder is ready, molten and silvery in the iron pot, you apply it to the splice with a heated iron. The metal flows around the twisted copper, forming a permanent bond that will conduct electricity as well as the original wire. You let it cool slowly, then wrap the entire splice with rubber tape to protect it from moisture and corrosion. The repair takes the better part of an hour, and by the time you finish, the sun is directly overhead and the temperature has climbed into the 90s. Sweat stings your eyes and runs down your back beneath your heavy work shirt. Your hands are grimy with solder and smoke stains, and your throat is dry from the constant wind. You test the repair with your telegraph key, tapping out a series of signals and listening for the proper response from the wire. The electrical pulses flow cleanly through your splice, and you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction. Another break fixed. Another section of the great network restored. But there are still miles to go before dark, and the afternoon heat is building to levels that will make climbing dangerous. You decide to push on for another few miles, then find shade and rest during the worst heat of the day. The landscape around you is beginning to change subtly as you move north. The grass is shorter here, more brown than green, a sign that water is scarcer and the soil poorer. In the distance, you can see the dark line of what might be trees, probably marking the course of a stream or creek. Trees mean water, and water means you might be able to refill your containers and maybe even risk a quick wash. But trees also mean more wildlife, and wildlife sometimes means trouble for telegraph lines. Bears have been known to scratch themselves against poles until the lines snap. Beavers, if there's water nearby, sometimes gnaw through wooden supports. Even birds can cause problems when they build nests on the insulators. You reach pole 300 just as the heat becomes unbearable. The wooden post offers a few feet of shade on its eastern side, and you stop there to rest and water Ezra. The mule drinks deeply from the canvas bucket, and you allow yourself a few swallows from your water bottle. The water is warm and has a metallic taste from the container, but it's wet and that's what matters. You lean back against the pole and close your eyes, listening to the constant wind and the occasional sound of Ezra moving around in the sparse grass. The silence out here is different from any quiet you've ever experienced. It's not the absence of sound so much as the presence of vastness, the sense that sound has room to dissipate into emptiness until it becomes part of the wind itself. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if you just stayed here, leaning against this pole in whatever shade you could find. If you stopped walking north toward the next repair and the next after that. If you let the wire go unmaintained and the connections fail one by one until this section of the great network went dark. But the thought never lasts long. This is your job, your responsibility, your reason for being in this place. Somewhere to the north and south, people depend on the messages that flow through this wire. Business communications that might make the difference between prosperity and bankruptcy. News that connects families separated by thousands of miles. Emergency signals that could mean life or death in the scattered settlements of the frontier. You are the keeper of those connections, the guardian of those messages. It's not glamorous work, and it's certainly not easy. But it matters in ways that go beyond the wages you earn or the recognition you might receive. After an hour's rest in the shade, you continue north. The heat is still oppressive, but you have miles to cover before dark, and the afternoon is burning away faster than you'd like. Pole 301 is solid and the connections clean. Pole 302 needs minor attention, a loose wire wrap that you tighten with practiced movements. At pole 305, you encounter another challenge. The insulator is intact, but a bird has built a nest directly on top of it, a construction of twigs and grass that effectively shorts out the line. You climb carefully, not wanting to disturb the eggs you can see nestled in the center of the nest. This is one of the more delicate aspects of the job, balancing the needs of the telegraph system with respect for the wildlife that shares this landscape. You relocate the nest carefully to a nearby branch, working slowly and gently until the eggs are secure in their new location. The parent birds scold you loudly from a safe distance, but they'll adapt to the new location. With the nest moved, you clean the insulator and test the connection. The line comes back to life immediately, electrical pulses flowing cleanly through the restored circuit. Another problem solved, another section of network maintained. The afternoon wears on, marked by the steady rhythm of walking and climbing and testing. Pole after pole stretches away to the north, each one requiring inspection, many needing minor repairs. Your shoulders ache from the weight of the tool pack. Your feet are sore from miles of walking in heavy boots. Your hands are stained with solder and wire and the inevitable dirt that accumulates from a day of outdoor work. But you push on, driven by the internal clock that measures progress in miles covered and poles inspected. By mid-afternoon, you've reached pole 315, still 5 short of your goal but making steady progress. The landscape ahead is changing, the grass giving way to more scrub brush and scattered rocks. In the distance, the dark line you spotted earlier has resolved into actual trees, cottonwoods and willows that mark the course of a creek or small river. Water. The prospect energizes you despite the heat and fatigue. You haven't had access to running water in 4 days, and your supplies are running low. More importantly, Ezra needs water, and the grass around the creek will be better grazing than the sparse prairie grass he's been subsisting on. You decide to push on toward the trees, knowing that pole 320 and your planned campsite are still miles away but hoping that the water source will make up for the extra distance. Sometimes you have to adjust your plans based on the realities of the country you're traveling through. The next few poles show increasing signs of weather damage as you approach the creek. The wood is more weathered, probably from the higher humidity near the water. Several insulators need replacement, and you work steadily through the afternoon, replacing cracked glass and wrapping loose connections. At pole 318, you discover evidence of more serious trouble. The wire is intact, but the pole itself leans at a dangerous angle, probably undermined by spring flooding from the nearby creek. The post is still functional, but it won't survive another flood season without attention. You make detailed notes in your logbook, including sketches of the problem and recommendations for repair. When you file your next report at Bent's Fort, the maintenance crew will know exactly what needs to be done and can plan accordingly. It's part of the system that keeps the Telegraph network functioning across these vast distances, each repair crew building on the work of the others. The sun is beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon when you finally reach the creek. The water runs clear over a bed of sand and rounded stones, perhaps 20 feet wide and shallow enough to ford easily. Cottonwood trees line both banks, their leaves rustling in the constant wind, and the grass grows thick and green in the bottomland. You make camp in a grove of trees on the north bank, grateful for the first real shade you've had in days. Ezra drinks deeply from the creek, then begins grazing on the rich grass with obvious pleasure. You strip off your boots and socks and wade into the water, feeling the cool current flow around your ankles and wash away the dust and sweat of the day. The sensation is almost overwhelming after days of heat and dryness. You cup the clear water in your hands and drink, then splash it on your face and neck, feeling the temperature of your body drop for the first time since morning. You refill your water containers, then carry bucket after bucket to fill the canvas basin you use for washing. As the sun sets, painting the western sky in shades of orange and red, you make your evening fire on the bank of the creek. The flames reflect off the moving water, creating patterns of light that dance and shift with the current. You heat water for coffee and prepare your evening meal of beans and hardtack, simple food that tastes better than any feast after a day of hard work. You record the day's progress in your logbook by firelight, noting the miles covered, the repairs completed, the problems identified for future attention. 18 poles inspected, 3 insulators replaced, 2 wire splices completed, 1 pole flagged for replacement, 1 nest relocated, total distance, 11 miles. Not bad for a day that started before dawn and ended after sunset. Tomorrow you'll push on toward pole 320 and beyond, continuing the endless cycle of maintenance that keeps the messages flowing across the frontier. But tonight, you have shade and water and the luxury of a campfire that doesn't have to be built from buffalo chips. Tonight, you can listen to the sound of running water instead of just wind through grass. Tonight, you can wash the dust from your clothes and feel almost human again. You tend to Ezra before settling down for the night, checking his hooves for stones and examining his legs for cuts or swelling. The mule is your lifeline out here, and his health is more important than your own comfort. He seems content, grazing in the rich grass near the water, and you give him an extra measure of oats as a reward for another hard day. As full darkness settles over the creek, you bank your fire and prepare for sleep. The tent goes up quickly in the familiar routine, and you arrange your bedroll on ground that feels softer than it has in days. The sound of running water will be your lullaby tonight instead of the constant wind. You lie on your back looking up at the stars through the open tent flap. The Milky Way stretches across the clear sky like a river of light, and you pick out the constellations you've learned to navigate by during your years on the frontier. The North Star, steady and reliable. The Big Dipper, pointing the way home to places you sometimes wonder if you'll ever see again. But home is a flexible concept when you live out of a tent and measure distance in telegraph poles. Home is wherever you make camp at the end of the day. Home is the routine of work and rest and the satisfaction of maintaining something larger than yourself. You close your eyes and let the sound of the creek carry you toward sleep, knowing that tomorrow will bring another day of walking and climbing and patient repair work. Another day of maintaining the thin copper thread that connects distant cities and carries human voices across the vast silence of the American frontier. And in the morning, you'll wake to the sound of water instead of wind, and you'll begin another day of the work that chose you just as much as you chose it. The creek murmurs through your dreams, a constant whisper of movement and life in a landscape that often seems empty of both. But you know better now, after 3 years out here. The emptiness is an illusion. The land teems with life that has adapted to extremes, just as you have adapted to the solitude and the weather and the endless responsibility of keeping the messages flowing. You wake before dawn, as always, but this morning the air smells of water and growing things instead of dust and sage. The creek runs past your camp with a sound like soft conversation, and the cottonwood leaves whisper secrets in the pre-dawn breeze. You lie still for a moment, savoring the luxury of shade and moisture before beginning another day. Your body feels better than it has in weeks. The water you drank yesterday has helped flush some of the constant dehydration that comes with life on the prairie, and the softer ground has given you the first decent night's sleep you've had since leaving the last depot. Even your hands, usually cracked and raw from constant exposure to sun and wind, feel smoother after yesterday's wash in the creek. But comfort is temporary out here. Today you'll leave the creek behind and return to the endless expanse of prairie, carrying what water you can and hoping the next source isn't too many days away. You build your morning fire from driftwood collected along the bank, dry timber that burns cleanly and produces less smoke than the buffalo chips you've been using. The coffee tastes better too, made with clear creek water instead of the brackish liquid from your water barrels. As you drink your coffee and eat your simple breakfast, you plan the day ahead. Hole 320 is still 3 miles north of the creek, and beyond that the country opens up into the kind of vast emptiness that makes you feel like the last person on Earth. Your goal is to reach pole 335 by evening, an ambitious target that will require steady progress and minimal delays. But the prairie has taught you not to count on anything going according to plan. Weather can change in minutes out here. Equipment can fail when you need it most. A single major line break can cost you hours of repair time. You break camp methodically, loading Ezra with the now familiar weight of tools and supplies. The mule seems refreshed by his night near water and good grass, stepping out eagerly as you lead him away from the creek and back into the prairie. The morning air is cool and still, but you know the heat will build quickly once the sun climbs higher. By noon, the temperature will be well over 100 degrees, and the exposed metal of your tools will be too hot to touch with bare hands. Pole 319 stands a quarter-mile from the creek, and you can see that flood damage has been more severe here than you initially realized. The post leans at nearly a 20-degree angle, held upright mainly by the tension of the telegraph wire itself. The base has been undermined by spring floods, and the whole structure could collapse in the next strong wind. You make detailed notes and sketches in your logbook, documenting the problem for the repair crew that will eventually follow your route. This pole will need to be completely replaced, probably before the next flood season. It's the kind of major repair that requires a full crew and specialized equipment, not something a single man can handle alone. But the wire connections are still secure, and your test signals flow through the line without problems. Sometimes the most precarious-looking repairs are actually the most solid, held together by forces you can't see from the ground. You continue north as the sun climbs higher and the morning coolness begins to fade. The landscape gradually returns to the familiar pattern of endless grass and distant horizons, broken only by the regular march of telegraph poles disappearing into the heat shimmer. Pole 320 marks a milestone of sorts, the end of yesterday's planned route and the beginning of today's challenges. The post appears solid from the ground, but when you climb to inspect the connections, you discover that the glass insulator has developed a hairline crack that could cause problems in wet weather. You replace the insulator carefully, working 40 feet above the ground with the morning wind trying to throw you off balance. The work requires complete concentration. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and you could fall to serious injury or death with no one to help and no way to call for assistance. The new insulator fits perfectly, green glass gleaming in the sunlight, and you rewrap the wire connection with the mechanical precision that comes from years of practice. Your test signals confirm that the repair is successful, and you climb down to continue your journey north. The country ahead stretches away toward distant hills that shimmer in the heat like mirages. According to your maps, the next water source is at least 30 miles away, a small spring marked with a notation that it might be dry in late summer. Between here and there, the land offers nothing but grass and wind and the constant presence of the telegraph line. But this is the work you chose, or that chose you. The maintenance of communication across impossible distances, the preservation of connection in a landscape that seems designed to isolate and separate. Every pole you inspect, every wire you repair, every insulator you replace is part of something larger than yourself. You think about the messages that flow through the wire above your head as you walk north through the growing heat. Business communications connecting distant cities. News reports carrying information across the continent in minutes instead of weeks. Personal messages from families separated by thousands of miles of difficult country. Sometimes, when you're testing a repair, you catch fragments of actual telegraph traffic flowing through the line. Brief bursts of code that represent human voices reaching across the void. You never try to decode the messages, of course. That would be a violation of trust and probably illegal. But knowing that human communication is flowing through the wire you maintain gives meaning to the isolation and hardship. Pole 325 needs minor attention, a loose wire wrap that you tighten with practiced movements. The post itself is solid, but the glass insulator shows signs of stress fractures that could become problems in the next severe weather. You make a note to recommend replacement when the next supply crew comes through. The heat is building steadily as the sun approaches its zenith, and you can feel sweat beginning to soak through your heavy work shirt. The metal tools in your pack are already too hot to handle with bare hands, and the climbing spikes will soon be burning to the touch. You push on toward pole 330, knowing that you'll need to find shelter and rest during the worst heat of the day. A man can die of heat stroke out here, and there's no margin for error when you're working alone. The telegraph company might prefer that their repair crews push through regardless of conditions, but dead workers don't maintain lines. At pole 328, you discover your first major problem of the day. Lightning has struck the post sometime in the recent past, probably during one of the violent thunderstorms that sweep across the prairie with little warning. The wood is split and charred, and the wire has been severed completely. This is serious damage that will require several hours to repair properly. The broken wire ends are separated by nearly 20 feet, dangling from adjacent poles like the ends of a snapped guitar string. You'll need to splice in a new section of wire and possibly replace the damaged insulator as well. You set up for major repair work in whatever shade the damaged pole can provide, spreading your tools on the canvas ground cloth and preparing for meticulous work in difficult conditions. The temperature is already approaching dangerous levels, and working with hot metal and soldering equipment will only make things worse. But the line must be repaired. Somewhere to the north and south, communities depend on the communication that flows through this wire. Emergency messages might be waiting to get through. Business communications that could affect the livelihoods of dozens of people. You begin by cutting away the damaged sections of wire, using your knife to strip insulation and expose clean copper for splicing. The metal is hot enough to burn your fingers, and you have to work in brief intervals, letting your hands cool between tasks. The splicing work takes most of the morning, careful connections that must be mechanically sound before you apply solder. Each joint must be perfect, able to carry electrical signals without loss or distortion. A poor splice might work initially but fail during the next storm or cold snap. By the time you finish the repair, the sun is directly overhead and the heat has become dangerous. Your shirt is soaked with sweat, and you're feeling the early symptoms of heat exhaustion. Dizziness, nausea, the kind of fatigue that comes from asking your body to do too much in impossible conditions. You test the repair with your telegraph key, sending signals in both directions and confirming that the line is fully functional. Then you retreat to whatever shade you can find and force yourself to rest, drinking water in small sips and waiting for the worst heat of the day to pass. Ezra stands patiently in the minimal shade cast by the damaged pole, his gray coat dark with sweat, ears twitching constantly to ward off the flies that seem to appear from nowhere in this heat. You pour a small amount of precious water into your canvas bucket and offer it to him, watching as he drinks slowly, methodically, his throat working with each swallow. The heat radiates up from the hard ground in visible waves, distorting your view of the distant horizon until everything beyond a few hundred yards shimmers like water. You know better than to push on in these conditions. Heat stroke kills quickly out here, and there's no one to help if you collapse miles from the nearest settlement. You rig a small shelter using your canvas ground cloth and 2 spare tent poles, creating a triangle of shade barely large enough for you to sit upright. The temperature inside is still brutal, but at least you're protected from the direct assault of the sun. You remove your heavy work shirt and use it to wipe the sweat from your face and neck, feeling the salt sting in the small cuts and scrapes that accumulate from daily contact with wire and tools. Your water supply is becoming a concern. The 2 canvas water bags you filled at the creek yesterday morning now hold less than half their original contents, and you're still at least 2 days from the next reliable water source. You measure out a careful ration for yourself, drinking just enough to stave off the worst effects of dehydration while conserving what remains for the journey ahead. The afternoon passes slowly in the suffocating heat. You doze fitfully in your makeshift shelter, waking periodically to check on Ezra and to take small sips of warm water. The mule has found his own patch of shade and stands with his head down, conserving energy the way animals do when survival depends on patience. You think about the messages that should be flowing through the wire you've just repaired. Business communications between Denver and Kansas City. News reports traveling from one telegraph office to another. Personal messages from families separated by the vast distances of the frontier. For now, thanks to your morning's work, those communications are flowing again, carried by electrical impulses that move faster than any horse or train. But thinking about the outside world only emphasizes your isolation. Out here, you exist in a bubble of solitude that stretches for miles in every direction. The nearest human beings are probably at Bent's Fort, still 2 days' journey to the northeast. The nearest settlement of any size is Dodge City, more than a week away by horseback. Yet somehow, the solitude doesn't feel oppressive. After 3 years of this work, you've learned to find company in the rhythm of daily routine, in the satisfaction of problems solved and connections restored. The prairie has its own conversation if you know how to listen. The whisper of wind through grass, the distant cry of hawks riding the thermals, the soft sound of Ezra's breathing in the heat. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, the temperature finally starts to drop from unbearable to merely uncomfortable. You pack up your improvised shelter and prepare to continue north, knowing that you can cover several more miles before the light fails completely. Pole 329 shows minor weather damage, a few loose wire wraps that you tighten quickly before moving on. The heat is still intense, but bearable now, and you can work without feeling like you're going to collapse from exertion. At pole 330, you pause to take stock of your progress. You're running behind your planned schedule, thanks to the morning's major repair and the afternoon's forced rest, but you're still making steady progress northward. According to your maps, pole 335 should put you within striking distance of tomorrow's goal, a section of line that runs near another small creek marked on your survey charts. The evening light begins to take on the golden quality that transforms the prairie from harsh monotony into something approaching beauty. The endless grass waves in the constant wind, creating patterns of light and shadow that shift and flow like water. In the distance, you can see a small herd of antelope picking their way delicately across the open ground, their white rumps flashing as they bound away from your approach. Pole 332 needs attention, a cracked insulator that you replace as the sun sinks lower in the west. Your test signals confirm that the repair is successful, and you continue north through the cooling air. The worst heat of the day is finally breaking, and you can feel your energy returning as the temperature drops below the danger threshold. You reach pole 335 just as the sun touches the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that make the whole landscape glow. This will be your campsite for the night, a spot marked by nothing more than the familiar wooden post and the thin copper wire that connects it to the larger world. You set up camp with the efficiency that comes from repetition, clearing a space for your tent and gathering fuel for the evening fire. Buffalo chips are plentiful here, dried by the sun and wind until they burn almost as well as wood. You build your fire ring from stones collected in the area, creating a windbreak that will keep the flames steady in the constant prairie breeze. Ezra gets his evening ration of oats and the last of the water from the creek, measured out carefully to ensure he stays healthy and strong. You brush him down with handfuls of prairie grass, removing the dust and salt that accumulate from a day of walking in heat and wind. The mule seems to enjoy the attention, leaning into your touch as you work on the muscles of his neck and shoulders. Your own evening meal is simple but satisfying. Beans soaked and cooked slowly over the fire, flavored with a small piece of salt pork from your dwindling supplies. Hardtack softened in the bean broth until it's actually edible. Coffee made from the last of your good beans, saving the chicory substitute for true desperation. As you eat, you watch the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Out here, far from any town or settlement, the night sky reveals itself in all its spectacular glory. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon like a river of light, and the individual stars shine with a clarity impossible to see in more civilized places. You take out your logbook and record the day's work by firelight. Miles covered, poles inspected, repairs completed, problems identified for future crews. The routine is important, not just for the Telegraph Company's records but for your own sense of accomplishment and progress. Today's entry tells the story of challenging work completed under difficult conditions. Lightning damage repaired, multiple insulators replaced, wire connections tested and secured. Another section of the great network maintained and restored to full function. But the numbers and technical details don't capture the real story of the day. The satisfaction of solving complex problems with simple tools and hard-won experience. The quiet pride of work that connects distant communities and keeps vital communications flowing. The strange peace that comes from solitude and routine and the endless horizon. You bank the fire carefully, ensuring it will provide warmth through the cool night hours while conserving fuel for morning coffee. The temperature on the prairie can drop 40 degrees between day and night, and you've learned to prepare for the chill that comes with darkness. Your tent goes up in the familiar routine, canvas walls that will provide some protection from the wind and whatever weather the night might bring. Inside, you arrange your bedroll on ground that seems softer after the day's walking, though you know it's just fatigue making everything feel more comfortable. You lie on your back with the tent flap open, looking up at the stars and listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote calls, its voice rising and falling in the darkness. Closer by, you can hear Ezra moving around in his rope corral, the soft sound of his hooves on hard earth and the occasional rustle as he searches for the last bits of edible grass. Tomorrow will bring another day of walking and climbing and patient repair work. Another day of maintaining the thin thread of communication that connects this vast landscape to the rest of the world. Another day of solitude and routine and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. But tonight, you have shelter and fire and the company of stars that have guided travelers across this country for thousands of years before the first telegraph pole was ever planted in prairie soil. You close your eyes and let the wind carry you toward sleep, feeling the day's heat finally begin to leave your body. The ground beneath your bedroll is hard, but you've grown accustomed to discomfort. The wind rattles the tent walls with steady persistence, but the sound has become a lullaby that helps rather than hinders rest. In the distance, thunder rumbles across the night sky, too far away to bring rain but close enough to remind you that weather is always a factor in this work. Tomorrow might bring storm damage to repair, or it might bring another day of blazing heat and endless walking. Either way, you'll meet it with the same patient determination that has carried you through 3 years of frontier telegraph work. You wake to the sound of rain drumming against canvas, a steady rhythm that tells you this is no brief shower but a serious storm that could last for hours. The air inside the tent is cool and humid, heavy with moisture that makes everything feel damp to the touch. Through the tent walls, you can hear the wind driving the rain in sheets across the prairie. Your first thought is relief. Rain means an end to the brutal heat, cooler temperatures for working, and possibly enough water to refill your containers. But rain also means mud, treacherous footing for climbing poles, and the possibility of lightning damage to the line you're supposed to maintain. You lie still for a few minutes, listening to the storm and gauging its intensity. This is a real plains thunderstorm, the kind that can dump inches of rain in a short time and turn dry creek beds into raging torrents. The lightning is frequent enough that you can see the flashes through the tent fabric, followed by thunder that rolls across the open country like artillery. But storms pass quickly on the prairie, and you know from experience that this one will probably blow through by mid-morning, leaving behind cooler air and blessed relief from the heat. You pull on your boots and rain slicker, preparing to check on Ezra and secure anything that might blow away in the wind. Outside, the rain hits you like a cold shock after yesterday's heat. The drops are large and warm, driven by wind that bends the prairie grass flat against the ground. Your fire has been extinguished, of course, the ashes turn to black mud in the downpour. But Ezra stands calmly in his rope corral, ears forward and eyes bright, enjoying the cool moisture after days of blazing sun. You check the guy ropes on your tent, tightening anything that has loosened in the wind, then retreat inside to wait out the worst of the storm. Rain pounds on the canvas above your head with increasing intensity, and you can hear water beginning to pool around the tent's base despite your efforts to camp on high ground. The storm reaches its peak just as dawn should be breaking, lightning flashing almost continuously and thunder following so quickly that you know the strikes are close. The rain comes down in torrents now, turning the world outside into a gray wall of water that reduces visibility to a few feet. This is weather that makes telegraph work impossible. Climbing wet poles in high wind with lightning all around would be suicide, and even minor repairs become dangerous when you're handling metal tools in an electrical storm. You settle in to wait, using the forced delay to catch up on maintenance tasks that are usually neglected in the daily rush of covering distance. You clean and oil your tools, working by the gray light that filters through the tent walls. Wire strippers, pliers, climbing spikes, the small telegraph key that lets you test each repair. Everything gets attention, the kind of careful maintenance that extends the life of equipment and prevents failures at critical moments. Your boots get special treatment, waterproofed with Neat's foot oil and checked for wear that could leave you stranded with failed footwear. Out here, good boots are literally a matter of life and death, and you've learned to take care of them like your life depends on it, because it does. The logbook gets updated with yesterday's entries, each repair carefully documented with sketches and notes that will guide future maintenance crews. The work might seem tedious, but it's part of the larger system that keeps the telegraph network functioning across impossible distances. Gradually, the storm begins to weaken. The rain softens from driving sheets to steady drops, and the lightning moves off toward the east, thunder becoming more distant with each rumble. By mid-morning, the worst has passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and 20 degrees cooler than yesterday's heat. You emerge from the tent to find the prairie transformed. The dust that coats everything in dry weather has been washed away, leaving colors vivid and sharp. The grass looks greener, the sky a deeper blue. Even the wooden telegraph poles look cleaner, their weathered surfaces darkened by moisture but somehow more substantial. Your first priority is fire and coffee. The buffalo chips you collected yesterday are soaked, but you've learned to carry dry tinder in a waterproof pouch for exactly this situation. Soon you have flames crackling in the stone ring, fed by chips that steam and smoke but eventually catch fire. Coffee has never tasted better than it does on a cool morning after days of brutal heat. You drink slowly, savoring each sip while you assess the storm's impact on your work. The telegraph line appears intact from ground level, but you won't know the real extent of any damage until you begin the day's inspections. The wet ground makes walking treacherous at first, your boots slipping on grass made slick by rain. But the cool air is intoxicating after yesterday's heat, and you find yourself moving with more energy than you've felt in days. Ezra seems to share your mood, stepping out eagerly despite the muddy footing. Pole 336 shows no obvious storm damage, and your test signals flow through the line without problems. But when you climb to inspect the connections, you discover that rain has collected in the glass insulator, creating a short circuit that will cause problems as soon as the line carries any significant traffic. You drain the water carefully and dry the insulator with a piece of cloth, then check the wire connections for signs of corrosion. Everything appears sound, but you make a note to monitor this section carefully during future inspections. Water in insulators is a common problem after storms, and one that can cause mysterious signal failures if not addressed promptly. The morning progresses with steady inspections and minor repairs. The cool air makes climbing easier, and you cover ground faster than you have in days. But the wet conditions also reveal problems that dry weather conceals. Several poles show signs of rot at the base, softened by moisture until the wood gives under pressure from your knife point. At pull 340, you discover more serious storm damage. Lightning has struck nearby, probably hitting the ground close enough to send a surge through the line that burned out the wire connection at the insulator. The copper is blackened and brittle, requiring complete replacement of the damaged section. This is delicate work that requires steady hands and complete attention. You strip away the damaged wire, cutting back to clean copper that shows no signs of electrical burning. The replacement section must be measured precisely, with enough slack to account for thermal expansion but not so much that it sags dangerously in high winds. The soldering work is more difficult in the humid air, the solder reluctant to flow properly on damp metal. You take extra time to clean and dry each connection, using cloth and file to remove any trace of moisture or oxidation that could compromise the repair. Your test signals confirm that the repair is successful, electrical pulses flowing cleanly through the restored connection. Another problem solved, another section of the network returned to full function. The work is satisfying in a way that goes beyond simple completion of assigned tasks. The afternoon brings scattered showers that keep the temperature comfortable but make working conditions challenging. You learn to time your climbs between rain squalls, racing up pulls to complete quick inspections before the next wave of moisture arrives. By evening, you've covered more ground than any day since leaving the creek, reaching pull 355 despite the morning's delay and the afternoon's weather challenges. The campsite you choose is on slightly higher ground, hoping to avoid any overnight flooding if more storms develop. The evening routine feels different in the cool, humid air. Your fire burns cleanly without the constant wind that usually challenges every flame. Coffee and beans taste better when you're not fighting heat exhaustion and dehydration. Even Ezra seems more content, grazing on grass refreshed by the day's rain. You record the day's progress by firelight, noting the storm damage repaired and the problems identified for future attention. The logbook entry captures the technical details, but not the simple pleasure of working in comfortable temperatures after days of brutal heat. As you prepare for sleep, you can see more weather building on the western horizon, lightning flickering in distant clouds that might bring more rain during the night. But you're prepared now, camp set up with proper drainage and everything secured against wind and moisture. You lie in your bedroll listening to the soft patter of light rain on canvas, a sound infinitely more pleasant than the constant wind that usually serves as the prairie's lullaby. Tomorrow will bring whatever challenges the weather decides to send, but tonight you're cool and dry and caught up on the day's work. The rain continues through the night, gentle and steady, soaking into ground that desperately needed the moisture. You wake several times to the sound of water running off the tent in small rivulets, but the shelter holds and you stay dry and comfortable. Morning comes gray and cool, with low clouds that promise more rain but no immediate threat of severe weather. The air smells clean and fresh, washed free of the dust that usually colors every breath on the prairie. Even the quality of light seems different, softer and more forgiving than the harsh glare of yesterday's sun. Your morning fire starts easier with the humidity settling the dust, and coffee made with rainwater collected in your canvas bucket tastes cleaner than anything you've had in days. You take extra time over breakfast, savoring the luxury of cool air and the knowledge that today's work won't be a battle against heat exhaustion. The telegraph line stretches ahead through landscape transformed by rain. Colors are more vivid, the grass actually green instead of brown, the wooden poles dark with moisture but standing straight and solid against the gray sky. You begin the day's work with energy that has been absent since you left the creek 2 days ago. Pull 356 needs minor attention, a loose wire wrap that you tighten while enjoying the novelty of working without sweat stinging your eyes. The metal tools are cool to the touch instead of burning hot, and you can work steadily without the frequent breaks that heat normally demands. The morning's progress is excellent despite occasional light showers that force brief delays. You cover 4 miles and inspect 20 poles before noon, finding mostly minor problems that yield quickly to routine maintenance. The cool air makes climbing easier, and you find yourself actually enjoying the physical challenge instead of simply enduring it. At pole 375, you discover evidence of more significant storm damage. The wire has been severed completely, probably by debris blown against the line during yesterday's high winds. The broken ends dangle from adjacent poles, and you can see where a large tumbleweed caught the wire and snapped it with its weight and wind resistance. This repair will take most of the afternoon, but the cool weather makes the work manageable instead of dangerous. You set up for major splicing work, spreading your tools on the canvas ground cloth that stays dry in the humid air instead of cracking in the heat. The splicing work goes smoothly, copper joining to copper with mechanical precision that comes from years of practice. The solder flows properly in the cool air, creating joints that will carry electrical signals as efficiently as the original wire. Each connection is tested and retested until you're satisfied with its integrity. By late afternoon, the repair is complete and tested, the line carrying signals cleanly in both directions. You pack your tools with the satisfaction of another problem solved, another section of the network restored to full function. The day's final miles pass through country that shows more signs of human presence than you've seen in weeks. A few scattered fence posts mark the boundaries of some distant ranch. Wheel ruts from a wagon track cross the prairie heading east toward more settled country. In the distance, you can see what might be smoke from a chimney, the first such sign of civilization you've encountered since leaving Bent's Fort. But you're still days away from any real settlement, still dependent on your own resources for survival in this vast landscape. The telegraph line remains your guide and your responsibility, the thin thread that connects you to the larger world while keeping you isolated from it. You make camp at pole 385 as the sun sets through clearing clouds, the first real sunset you've seen in days after the heat haze and afternoon storms. The sky colors are spectacular, painting the western horizon in shades of gold and crimson that make the entire prairie glow. Your evening fire burns steadily in the still air, no longer fighting the constant wind that usually challenges every flame. The beans cook evenly, and coffee tastes better than it has since you left the creek. Even your simple meal seems more satisfying when you're not fighting heat and dehydration. Ezra grazes contentedly on grass refreshed by rain, and you take extra time to brush him down and check him over for any problems. The mule has been your constant companion through heat and storms, carrying his load without complaint and adapting to whatever conditions the prairie presents. You record the day's work in your logbook by firelight, noting the excellent progress made possible by the cooler weather. 29 poles inspected, 1 major wire splice completed, multiple minor repairs finished, total distance covered. Nearly 8 miles. The best single day you've had since starting this section of line. But the numbers don't capture the real story of the day. The simple pleasure of working in comfortable conditions. The satisfaction of complex repairs completed without battling heat exhaustion. The strange peace that comes from solitude broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the soft sound of rain on canvas. As you prepare for sleep, you can see stars beginning to appear through breaks in the clouds, promising clearer weather tomorrow but also the return of heat that will make every task more difficult. Tonight, though, you're cool and comfortable, caught up on your work and ready for whatever challenges the next day might bring. You fall asleep to the sound of light rain pattering on tent canvas, a lullaby infinitely more pleasant than the constant wind that usually serves as the prairie's nighttime voice. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new miles to cover in the endless task of maintaining communication across this vast landscape. But tonight, you're dry and cool and satisfied with work well done, Another day closer to completing this section of line and perhaps earning a few days of rest at the next supply depot. The rain stops sometime before dawn, leaving behind air so clean and cool that you wake feeling more refreshed than you have in weeks. The silence is almost startling after days of constant wind and the night sounds of storm. Even Ezra seems more alert, nickering softly as you emerge from the tent to check on him. Your morning fire starts easily in the still air, and you take time to prepare a more substantial breakfast than usual. Flapjacks made from precious flour, cooked on your flat iron pan over coals that burn evenly without wind to scatter them. Real syrup, saved for special occasions, that makes the simple meal taste almost luxurious. The cool morning air carries scents you'd forgotten existed during the heat wave. The smell of damp earth and growing grass. The clean odor of washed wood and rain-settled dust. Even the familiar canvas of your tent smells fresher, cleaner than it has in days. You break camp with reluctance, knowing that the return of clear skies will probably bring the return of brutal heat by afternoon. But the work must continue, and you have ground to cover while conditions remain favorable. The morning's progress is excellent. Cool air makes climbing easy, and you cover pole after pole without the frequent rest breaks that heat normally demands. The line appears to have weathered the storms well, requiring only minor maintenance and routine inspection. At pole 395, you reach another milestone. According to your maps, this puts you within 2 days of the next supply depot, a small outpost where you can resupply and perhaps share a hot meal with other human beings. The prospect energizes you despite the growing heat as the sun climbs higher in the clearing sky. The country ahead shows more signs of settlement. Fence lines become more common, and you can see the distant shapes of buildings shimmering in the heat. But you're still in the middle of vast emptiness, still dependent on your own resources and the reliability of your equipment. By noon, the heat has returned with vengeance, as if making up for the cool respite of the previous day. The metal tools burn to the touch, and sweat stings your eyes as you work. But the memory of yesterday's comfortable conditions makes the heat seem more bearable, a temporary discomfort rather than an endless ordeal. You push through the afternoon heat, making steady progress toward your goal. Each pull brings you closer to resupply, closer to the human contact that you sometimes forget you miss until the prospect appears on the horizon. The evening camp at pole 410 marks another day of solid progress despite the returning heat. As you record the day's work in your logbook, you realize that you're ahead of schedule for the first time since starting this section of line. The storm delays have been more than offset by the excellent progress made possible by cooler weather. Tonight's entry tells the story of routine maintenance and steady progress. 35 poles inspected, multiple minor repairs completed, no major problems encountered, total distance nearly 9 miles, bringing you within sight of the next phase of your journey. But the real story isn't captured in the technical details. It's in the satisfaction of work proceeding smoothly, of problems solved efficiently, of progress measured in miles walked and connections restored. Tomorrow will bring you to the supply depot, but tonight you're content with the rhythm of solitary work and the quiet accomplishment of another day completed. You fall asleep to the familiar sound of wind through grass, the prairie's eternal voice that has become more comforting than disturbing after 3 years of frontier telegraph work. Tomorrow will bring human contact and the complexity of civilization, but tonight you have the simple peace of solitude and work well done. The wind carries you towards sleep and dreams of copper wire stretching endlessly across vast landscapes, connecting distant voices and carrying human communication across the silence of the American frontier.